So, welcome back. Today we are going to take a deep dive at the Plains of Ashford. The footage in the background will be us getting 100% map completion here, so pretty much exploring everywhere in the map. There might be a few odd locations that we don't get to just because Arena never filtered anything map completion wise out there, which is always such a shame. If you watched the previous video in this playlist where I was going through Queensdale, you will have heard me mention a windmill and a few, unfoggable locations. I'll try to mention as many of those as we go forwards, but yeah, I mean, it's obvious that with such a big game with so many places to go, eventually the devs are going to miss a place or two. So I do want to apologize as well. The first 3 episodes here might look a little bit stuttery to you guys. I'm not sure if there were any comments about that on the last part. And that's because these first few files that I was submitted are in MKV, and I'm very appreciative of them, but there's a little bit of weirdness with them. That won't persist after the first 3 parts, I promise you guys. Also, I figured I would speed up the footage ever so slightly. I know a lot of you guys talk about too quick footage, makes you feel sick or whatever, so we're not that much faster. But when you're going over very large maps, that'll be a pretty nice time save for us. There's no trickery here. This is the full thing, done very, very quickly, and generally quite nice. So far what we've seen already is a heart be completed, which is kind of a special heart to me in that it was added way after release. It's very odd for me to talk into the microphone right now and have to consider that there's a lot of players that don't know that anymore. But yeah, that heart was one of the most recent hearts to ever be added to core Tyria. There were a couple in a few of the maps just to flesh out those early game experiences that little bit more. And in particular, I do think that this map, the Plains of Ashford, needed it more than most. I always feel like I'm slightly behind. There's slightly too little to do in the very early game moments of this map. And I think it's because, honestly, there's not that many events. Unlike with Queensdale, this one didn't have as much development time. It wasn't focused on so much. It was, probably pushed out a lot quicker after they'd realized what they wanted the game to be. And so, yeah, it's a little bit lacking in some places. And they later came along and added a heart. They actually made a lot of changes. And in Queensdale too, I guess we can talk about it a bit. The new player experience. So when they released the game in China, they also did a bunch of updates and tweaks to so-called streamline the process. Which basically mean that all the early game events and hearts and stuff are way more simple to execute. So we just saw we were playing with some cannons a second ago. I don't believe that cannon interaction was there when the game first came out. It was only later that now you just press F and fire them. You used to actually have to load the cannonballs in properly. The community on the western side really didn't enjoy these changes. And probably the most famous of them was back in Queensdale, where now you just press F to dance in front of the cows, and you press F to grow all of the plants instead of actually bringing the water buckets and so on over. So it's a little bit of a shame. This particular heart here, helping Scar Stripe Claw, I don't think's really changed much, so that's nice. And this is one of the few with a regular event, actually, where they get attacked by Flame Legion. I will say, in defense of the new player experience, looking at the full product, and I've always made this argument, I think it's a strong one. Looking at the full product, maybe it's fair that the early areas don't immediately layer a bunch of complexities on you. Now, look, I get it. Having to pick up a water bucket and then use the skill on the plant is not that much more complicated than just pressing F. I get it. But by removing that from the early maps, what that allows the game to do over a broad level is keep being interesting to you as you go higher up the chain into the deeper maps. Because now when those mechanics start appearing there, they're not repeat mechanics, they're new. And hopefully that will captivate you in some way, Instead of dumping too much early, they're just sort of smoothing it out across the whole game, and thus maybe have higher player retention through the level 20s, 30 experiences and so on. Which I think was a big thing with Guild Wars 2. I think that they had real issues with people, retention would always drop around level 30, the way that the game was originally made. And I think that's because a lot of players really got a lot of satisfaction out of unlocking the skill bar. People are very skill-oriented, especially coming through Guild Wars 1. And then as soon as they got the elite slot, I think a lot of people lost motivation. So the devs have tried all kinds of things over the years to sort of wrap that and change that. But yeah, so that's some changes that have occurred here on this map. What we've already missed is some really cool stuff over at a Devourer Pen. Some weird gramophones. I'm actually really into the soundtrack of the game. and mining out all of the audio and music that they played. This map is kind of weird in those gramophones that, I think they're gramophones, that play really weird music for some of the Devourers and Devourer Pen here. It's actual music, and it sounds really weird and eerie and odd, and it will be alongside all the other tracks in the Guild Wars 2 like music files, but sound completely out of place. For a long time I wondered where it came from, but it's here. It's these gramophones on this map. So yeah, this is an example of one of the early game hearts that just don't really compel me that much in the Plains of Ashford. I think because this one just goes a little bit slow. I wish they did something a bit more with the lake, maybe. But yeah, so the background, we're now in Ascalon. This obviously is looking a little bit closer to the Guild Wars 1 Ascalon. But, you know, because Kryta looks very different between the two games. Very tropical and then suddenly very green. Here, they keep it feeling kind of orangey and autumnal, which is an aesthetic I actually really enjoy. But what ArenaNet are actually doing here with this region is that they're being a bit sneaky. They're being a bit tricky. See, I think for most players, coming from Guild Wars 1, they associated this region of the world as a very orangey place. And that was because in Guild Wars 1, we were exploring it right after the events of the Searing, where, you know, the sky boiled and the lakes turned to tar and massive crystals rained fire down on the land, and now it was all just a bit of a muddy wasteland, so it was very orange, very browny. And then it came to Guild Wars 2, where realistically everything should have grown back. I mean, yeah, we've got the ghost issue and there's stuff going on, but everything should have grown back. So what did ArenaNet do? They could have made it look really green. They could have made it look like pre-Searing Ascalon. But they didn't. They picked like this autumnal theme. So it's still very orangey. It feels different to Kryta, therefore. It feels a little bit like Guild Wars 1 Ascalon, therefore. But it's also still satisfied that, you know, reality, the foliage should have grown back and whatnot. It's also kind of different in the way their farms are set up. The Krytans are kind of really focused on veggies, plant life, which then they're eating. Meanwhile, over here, the Char, you're going to see they do a lot of beef farms and stuff. Not actually so much here in the Plains of Ashford, though. I don't think there's any beef or any kind of slaughtering going on this map. So here we're traveling into Duke Paradin's tomb. This is the equivalent of the garrison area from the last part. And it wasn't really a place that existed in Guild Wars 1. Obviously you had the catacombs there, but that becomes a dungeon in this game. So instead you get like a weird little taste of the catacombs, I guess. And there's not much to do for map completion. Really nice little move there with the portal. There is a meta event that takes place there. Probably one of the most localized meta events in the game, with just a couple of events that lead you to fighting some ghosts that are recurring characters from the original and who talk like the original. In fact, that happens all over the place. Most ghosts in these maps are direct quotes pulled from the original game. So I think people could get a lot of nostalgia out of that if they focused a lot on all that dialogue, which was kind of easy to miss and wasn't voice acted in the past and stuff. So I'm sure it goes over most people's heads. But yeah, the tomb is kind of like the garrison in as much as, you know, that's where the tutorial started. I've always liked that part of the map. I just wish that they used it a bit more. Here, coming down to the bottom left, we've missed kind of a cool tunnel that connects this exact region right close to the Black Citadel, which I've always loved. This was a regular place for me for many years to come to in Guild Wars 2 on pretty much all my characters. And the reason for that is that once you beat this heart, do you need to beat the heart or is it the end of an event? There was a consumable available here that was excellent for stealth. It still exists, but the devs like balanced it. It's got more of a cooldown and stuff. I don't really rely on any of that stuff anymore. Probably a positive change for the game. But I do also know that if you're like super into fractals particularly, there's still a lot of that inventory stuff with selecting rocks and branches and planks and stuff, mostly for break bar scenarios, not necessarily stealth. But back during the old dungeon running days, these stealth consumables were great. There were like 3 of them. I'll talk about them as we go through, but the one purchased here was definitely a big one. Personal story kind of takes you here a few times as well, so I think most people are going to be familiar with this area. Another kind of after-release update that you might be interested in is this exact area here, the Langmar Estate, which did not exist. This whole like little secluded glen section through this like bit of rubble, none of that existed. That was all added for the guild mission. So that was a really exciting update that actually expanded this map in a pretty substantive way. And then, even after that, eventually ArenaNet decided that they wanted the guild puzzle areas to be in their own instances. So as a puzzle, it's basically like a big tomb with all kinds of fun stuff. That was all originally in the open world. And when it was first implemented, it was random which puzzle you got at what time. So yes, you had a chance of finding another guild there when you arrived, but it didn't happen too much. Later, ArenaNet kind of unified a lot of that stuff, and it meant that every single guild in the game with the PvE preference or the balance preference would all have that one puzzle. So fearing that it would be way too overpopulated and just a complete mess, and you know, would also mean that most of the maps filled up with players all localized in the bottom left, they instead split it away into an instance. It's a change. I think I understand why they did it, but it's a change I don't like. I really liked the sense of it all being integrated out there in the open world. I think that was the most powerful thing about guild missions. You know, you see a ton of people, someone say, oh, what are you guys doing? And they say, we're doing a mission. And they say, do you want to join? Here's a guild invite. And, you know, you kind of organically grow. The more you hide people away in instances, the less that is an opportunity to happen. I think that's a mistake a lot of MMOs make for a lot of their end game content. You know, you can see that same patterns with dungeons, with raids, all sorts of places. Anyway, and guild missions were a way of getting around that. Anyway, so I guess we're kind of zigzagging through the center of the map here now. Looking over at Shaman's historical guide, you'll see that actually a good chunk of what we've been playing wasn't really available. It was in pre-searing, but not in post, which was the main part of the game. And it's only now we're kind of getting back into the old Ascalon map and regular regions of the game. Unlike with the previous video, where a huge amount of Guild Wars 1 explorables kind of overlap, for this area, it's really just the one map of old Ascalon that overlaps. And then Ascalon City and the Ascalon Arena we'll talk more about soon. So there's a lot less for us to talk about with that. It's funny as well because I have to admit, this region of the world I was so desperate to visit in the original game. I always wanted to be able to walk directly from Ascalon City to the ruins of Rin, see that like weird missing chunk in the center. And of course, by the time we get to do that in Guild Wars 2, something I very much appreciate, it's kind of a bit unrecognizable. Alright, so this is another very special place here. Help Penelo train troops. So they want you to capture Minotaurs and Drakes and spar with them in the fighting pit. First of all, I've spent many hours here grinding underwater weapons because these were low-level enemies I could fight for underwater weapons slayer achievements. Also, this is where I came to do all my Drake achievements many years ago. And I love the heart just in general for the way that it's structured. So you get this cool rifle, which, you know, you're supposed to get the enemy below 50% health, and then you throw a net around them and it properly captures them with a big animation here. You'll see like they get this big cage around them. And what's actually happening is those creatures are being used in an arena. So there's two ways to do this heart. You can come out into the field and help these people here, or you can go to an arena where you participate in wave defense against various creatures. They do that in some of the later char maps as well, and I adore those. The idea that an actual dungeon-style voting pop-up appears in the middle of the screen, that's fantastic. That's something ArenaNet should do more of in recent patches as well, and recent expansions. It's so cool, especially when there's like a whole Zerg around, and you see like 13 people voted that they want to fight Risen, 13 people voted that they want to fight Branded, and 14 voted that they wanted Drakes, for example. I can't actually remember the precise enemies that come out up there. But yeah, you can go up there, and it is a bit OP just defending in the arena because you get so much heart credit for kills. So I think it's designed such that every now and then the arena closes down and you have to come capture more creatures here that will sort of recharge it, if as it were. I don't think there's actually any like super sophisticated coding going on the back end that's actually counting the number of creatures, but they're just two different ways of doing the same heart that I really like. And I like being up at that outpost. I like, especially when it comes to strangers around you, maybe there's only two people and you're both voting. They're great reasons to start socializing and chatting, which is just something Guild Wars needs as much as possible. Because you'll notice, yesterday in the previous video, I talked all about how, you know, map completion kind of became the be-all and end-all for a lot of this. And yet, all this map completion, very little of it involves socializing or interacting with people. And so I'll take that wherever I can, because I really think Guild Wars needs it. So over here, we got the veteran prototype Effigy. I think this guy got nerfed at one point, because he was very strong. I don't know if he was ever a champion. There's that little island in the middle of this lake here with the ruin on it. Now, there was a champion boss that appeared there. I believe it... What is it? A Skelk? Or maybe it's a ghost? Not required for map completion in any way. But it always sticks out in my mind because in the early years, I remember people started getting into the idea of soloing bosses. And particularly bosses in the open world. You don't really find people do that anymore. But these kinds of videos were very popular for a brief window in Guild Wars 2's history. And I remember a guy, I don't remember who produced it, but I remember a guy who did a video as a condition damage thief killing the champion on that little island, and it looking ridiculously impressive to me. Super impressive. So we just claimed a vista there with a cool little mini jumping puzzle. I always feel like the Ascalon maps, particularly the next couple, but the Ascalon maps are one of the easiest to identify just how like tacked on the vista system was to the game. Like all these maps were here and existed and were fine. And then they decided to add vistas, so all ArenaNet had to do was add these little rocks to a bunch of the existing cliff formations that were not meant to be playable content, and then just slap a vista on top of it. So now players can climb up and get the vista. And I would say a good 9 out of 10 vistas in the char maps is exactly that. It's some kind of existing cliff formation, and now you're just going to climb up it, hop in on these little rocks, and that's it. I suppose it's hard to be creative when you are being asked to create a ton of vistas all at once in bulk after all the maps have already been made. And obviously when we get to the expansions, we see that they're a lot more integrated. It's always very, very obvious to me on this map. Another great event on one of my like low-level challenges I've done over the years, or you know, but we've done so many different concepts. This guy's usually quite hard. If you're trying to like limit yourself in some way, you're doing something low level or whatever, they can actually be a challenge. So for them, I have utmost respect. I love seeing that wherever I can in the game. Scout the Abbey ruins with the Bane warband. I don't really remember doing this much. This whole cave is a weird one. There's like torches that you can light up, isn't there? There's an environmental weapon that you can pick up. And I think you can spawn a boss here every now and then. It would be interesting to see how this event concludes, because honestly, I don't really remember this one. And that's one of the nice things about Guild Wars, honestly, that sometimes you don't recognize one of the events. Another little area, of course, that's underground. It gives us a sense of the catacombs without actually taking us fully into them. Because you kind of got a twin thing going on for the char areas. It's half autumn, and then the other half is very haunted. You know, you get the blue light, it's stuff to do with the fire. In theory, this is a very Halloween-y area of the world. You know, the season's correct, and a lot of it's about ghosts and spooky creatures. But you're playing these badass warriors that fight off against them. And it's easy to forget about that and sort of just look past that, but I guess this would be another example of where things get very blue and the ghosts are supposed to be really quite scary. The ghosts themselves were much more threatening at launch as well. In particular, I do remember the warriors had a block ability that would reflect burning onto you every time you attacked into the block. And so if you think about what we saw in, say, Queensdale before with the heart, where you have to watch very carefully for when the guy's blocking and then attack the second he stops. I think ArenaNet had an idea once upon a time of players being much more precise about when and how they land their strikes. And the burning block thing was one of those ideas. It was really punishing. If you attacked too much into it, you'd stack a ton of burn on yourself. So then it got nerfed. I think it got nerfed because conditions, originally burning did not stack intensity. So you would just have it on you forever if you attacked too much into the block. And maybe that wasn't too obvious. Later, when conditions started stacking intensity, you could basically one-shot yourself on them, and they removed the mechanic. The precise timing of all of this, I'm getting a bit hazy on now. Maybe you guys can remember some of those details. So you get a nice hero banner. That's always good to see. I like seeing hero banners in weird places. Just gives you a sense of people being around. But honestly, one of the coolest, as far as social stuff is concerned, one of the coolest features in the game, as far as I remember. These little outposts are quite nice. So this is Temperance Point. I spent a lot of time here super recently trying to do one of my legendary collections because an event is supposed to trigger here to fight a Grawl, and it bugs really regularly, but it's supposed to start there, so I spent a ton of time. I always like those areas though, especially for the char tanks that surprisingly have like interiors and ladders and stairways and things that you can climb up. I think at that particular place back at Temperance Point, there's like even merchants inside one of the stationary tanks that isn't moving. Of course, in recent updates, we finally started to see those tanks be dynamic objects that drive around and whatnot, which is just a real thrill after so many years. But that one's always been a cool one to explore. It's a bit like the windmill, I guess. I tend to really enjoy and look forward to exploring closed-in interior spaces. I don't know why that is. It could be because as someone who came from Guild Wars 1, which was entirely open areas and like they never did interiors, there was something extra special about it that Guild Wars 2 could now do it. Great example here of some ghosts giving Guild Wars 1 dialogue. I think this is from one of the campaign missions. Which, to be fair, were sometimes actually being voice acted. Or actually, that might have been from the very end of pre-series. Because they're talking about Bonfaz Burnfur. Either that or maybe the mission later where you actually deal with Burnfur. We'd be kind of in the right area of the world for that, I suppose. Yeah, the story of the ghosts being that they're on an everlasting loop. They don't really know where they are. You'll dissipate them, they'll come back and say the same thing and fight in the same way later. And there's not much more that they can do. Pretty simple hearts, you'll notice. There's honestly a bit less to talk about compared to the Queensdale stuff. There are less Easter eggs on this map too. But here we're at the toppled wall and the Martyr's Waypoint. So the wall is a great feature in these maps. Always really, really nice to look at. I have a feeling that if ArenaNet had made this map in the more recent years, they would have done a lot more with the wall. So there are a couple of things. You'll see we do a Harpy event with the wall later. There are a couple of things that they do with it, but not much. And it's such a big, awesome structure, and we can now jump and climb around, especially with mounts. I feel like they would have really gone crazy with it. It's a bit like the Bone Wall, I guess, in the Path of Fire expansion. It's this big thing, but they didn't do too much. And I just think it's rich for such cool exploration. I really do. We just passed the statue of Badazhar, pretty iconic. The idea is the Grawl came to worship an old statue of the god Balthazar that's now depowered. What's funny is that statue was there very explicitly in Guild Wars 1. Oh, since we're now well and truly into sort of the old Ascalon areas, a lot of this should be very recognizable. In fact, where we're about to climb up, look at this, we've already done half of the Harpy thing. Where we're climbing up, for anyone who played Guild Wars 1, at pre-searing Ascalon, do you remember how you have to get two people, or had to? One of them hits a lever so that you can get into the Northlands. We're basically right just to the left of where you would be hitting that lever right now. We're looking at a really interesting thing here, which is this map has existed over 3 timescales. We saw this exact area in pre-searing, we saw this area in post-searing, and we're seeing it now in Guild Wars 2. Which is very cool, and there's not many places in the game where you can say that you've seen so many different eras of one place being shown. It's funny, a little bit north, you can again, because of the Gwen mission in the bonus mission pack, which also shows the same area of the world over multiple timescales. And maybe we can deal with that when we can. Just lots of easy zigzagging for points of interest here. It's really interesting. I would feel so lost doing this at the moment. I like to spiral around and move inwards. I guess we're slowly going left or right. This is another vista. I have to say, I always struggle on these vistas because, look at this one. On the bottom right, the minimap, you can see it's on the bottom right of the rock formation. But how are you supposed to know where the jumping puzzle starts, you know? In the game of these days, there's taco and, all kinds of overlays that you could do to just follow a line and run through the whole game. And I suppose you'd lose that magic there if you consider that. I always find these a little bit frustrating, honestly, to get to. Sword Cross Outpost. Now, that area, and you even saw the event there, is the start of many events that spread throughout this map for what is kind of this map's meta. So, unlike in Queensdale, where there's the Shadow Behemoth, that, is on a big daily world boss timer and loads of people will go to. Plains of Ashford's kind of special. It doesn't have a big world boss. It hosts the entrance to a dungeon, so that classically used to be a reason for people to come here a lot, and it's a starter map. But if you're at the point with the game where you like doing world bosses to get a lot of money, this map's going to quickly fall away from your mind because you don't come here for this boss. It is a really cool event chain with lots of different stuff going on. There's even like dynamic siege where you're going to get on some big trebs and you can destroy like a lot of the terrain and buildings and walls and stuff. Just like in the PvP map Kylo. They basically bring a bunch of that over here. And then you fight a big ghost general that could have been tagged as a proper world boss, but never was. So here, very special place. Ascalon City. It's underwater. This is, again, an amazing place. It was in the first trailer. In fact, in the first trailer, you can see crates swimming around in the water here. which I had once upon a time interpreted as Naga, who we haven't seen in the game so far. Maybe with the End of Dragons expansion, going back to Cantha, we may finally see Naga. That'll be something. But yeah, that pool did exist in the original trailer. The music is at a beautiful point when you get to see it. And obviously it was a novelty to even be able to swim when we were watching that. So the idea that, wow, Ascalon City is going to be flooded and we can swim around over there. Very, very thrilling. Ascalon City, I kind of feel like could have been done better as far as translating it over the 250 years. I like that they've done something, you know, you get a channel and whatnot, but I think the Temple of the Ages treatment is really good. And this one, you kind of can't recognize any of it. When you're at Ascalon City in pre, and when you're at Ascalon City in post, they feel like such big places with a lot going on. Admittedly, a lot of it has been destroyed in post, but then in Guild Wars 2, I don't know, I would only really recognize it because that's the name of the waypoint, right? Or because I guess where it is related to other landmarks like the catacombs and stuff. And that's a bit of a shame, honestly. Another one too we'll see later is Droknar's Forge. Droknar's Forge was a huge location in Guild Wars 1. Really, really cool place, and it's just like a little puddle in Guild Wars 2. Both of these places kind of suck. So what we're looking at here is a great example for new power creep. This gameplay would have been almost impossible at launch. This is a really dangerous area to just run through and have all of the ghosts charge you. You'll notice several of these are veterans, and they've got mass AoE. You're stuck in this little corridor. I remember trying to do exactly this at several points over my Guild Wars 2 life, and usually getting destroyed. But nowadays, it's really not that bad, and that will obviously get you this hero challenge. You can pick up the scroll, read about the faux fire. This location actually appears pretty prominently in the book Ghost of Ascalon. I have actually read that. I've got a full playlist on my channel where you can enjoy that book with me. But this is the heart of the faux fire, really, sort of. The place where King Adalbert read the scroll and blew everything up and created the ghosts. And in fact, where the team descends into the catacombs in the novel is right near here. That point of interest, you can see there's a fence ringing like a big hole, and that was where they dropped down. That was actually blocked off by invisible walls, and you know the fence was too high to climb over for many years. But nowadays, if you go there on a mount, you can actually jump down the hole, and you can explore a little bit more of the Plains of Ashford that you might not know exist. Any veterans watching me right now think you know everything about this map? You may have never gone down that hole. There's more to explore there than you'd expect. There's no map completion, there's no enemies, there's nothing to interact with, there's no loot, don't get me wrong. But it is a curious little place where the devs of 2012 seem to have gone above and beyond to generate all this terrain that no one was really meant to be exploring. Very cool little area in the top right of the map here with that small vista that I nearly always forget about. And we come to the Ogre Territory. So the story obviously in Ascalon is that the ogres have been pushed down from the mountains. This will be a story that we get more as we head further to the east, with the Blaze Ridge Mountains being the eastern chain that the ogres actually came from. We're right here on the easternmost edge of even the first map. You can find some. Spent a long time here as well with legendary collections. There's a particularly long defense event against a ton of ogres out of this crawl, and just killing them all tends to take a really long time. I actually find this place super frustrating to deal with when you arrive here and the event has already been beaten, because in that situation there's very little that you can tag and do to get progress. Now what Tech Doom's doing here is actually really clever. We're around the back of the crawl at the moment where there's all these extra supplies, and again, by the way, a cool little cave area here that there's no reason to explore off on the left. But by going around the back, you're getting all these supplies and resurrections and ogres and things. If you're more like me and you just end up in the big open fields around the front of the crawl, which I think is the more standard place to go, yeah, you can run out of stuff to do, especially if there's lots of other players around. I mentioned before that if lots of other players around, hearts slow down because everyone's rezzing all the NPCs. Well, the other thing is everyone's killing things, so you might not get tags. Guild Wars 2 tries to be very forgiving about tags, don't get me wrong, but it's a thing. And obviously if everything's dead, then they're not killing the NPCs in the first place, isn't it? So yeah, this is the same thing. The crawlers actually fall into the char control, but I guess by being quite clever, look at this, I'm learning here. We can tag all the spies. Oh, there you go, Stonecrag Crawl is just started. It's pretty good for loot as well, I remember in the early days. Any of these defense events were. But this one doesn't respawn that fast. It tended to be the ones that respawned real quick that you could really focus and drag yourself down onto. Some fun stuff with a sniper rifle here as well. I don't think ArenaNet ever quite figured out how to make open world siege and sniping work. Because they have the mechanic in the game where if an enemy can't path to you or you're too far away and it doesn't want to path to you, it will start rapidly regenerating its health. And I feel like they kind of had to add that, particularly when the realities of actually running an MMO where people are going to try and bot in it and people are going to try and hack and all that kind of stuff. That has to affect game design at some point. But it kind of ruins a lot of stuff they had in place, especially around these char maps, because the char have so much cool stuff to do with siege. And now it just kind of feels a bit flimsy, and I feel like that sniper rifle was rather similar. We just walked past a camp nestled in some of the hills there. That has to be one of my least frequently visited places in the whole game. I think we all have places like that where it's like, oh, I don't recognize this. They tend to be the sections of the map that don't have anything to do with map completion. And that one nearby, just to our north, is absolutely one for me. One of my favorite things about the main personal story playthrough I did with you guys last year is going there for ambient dialogue, because there's all this like information I just had no idea about. It's really is a testament to how big the game is, that I can still find stuff like that I've just almost never gone to. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know this existed. Of course, the area right down here with the scale is a place I'm sure many of us are familiar with, both because it has events and also it's a heart. Pretty simple, just run around collecting scale eggs. There's nothing special going on here. I wish I had more to say. And we can just deposit them and help these guys with their experiments. I think there's kind of a fun linking here of the event triggering as you do heart progress, maybe? Or one way and the other. This one's kind of weird as well, because this gun that we're using actually buffs the scales. Can you see how they have Might and Fury? Now, the game's balance nowadays, Might and Fury, just one stack in those quantities on a creature that attacks as slowly as these things, it doesn't mean anything. But I like the intent that the devs had there. I feel like this is one of the reasons why, over the years, ArenaNet have chosen, if they have a skill that gives you might, what they have often opted to do is just make it give you more might. So then, therefore, it's good. But I've always wanted the idea of how much might a stack gives to be fundamentally changed. Because if they did that, then that would have also retroactively affected all this content. And maybe that would be something we'd focus on. But as with so much of the open world, there could be any number of combat mechanics going on. And we just don't have to focus on them. You know, one of my favorite things that I've been doing recently is really reading closely the Guild Wars 2 official strategy guide, which does go through pretty much all of open world and explains a ton of stuff. It even has a bestiary section, which talks about all the special capabilities of the enemies you're fighting, like how a crab will block, or how a Barracuda will summon other Barracuda. But the way it expresses itself and talks about those things makes the game sound amazing, because it takes every little mechanic super seriously, as if it matters. And of course, we all know when we get in game, none of it does matter. But when you're reading the strategy guide, it gives you such a rich sense of like this incredible product, because you're thinking about all these things that should be going through your mind in each encounter, and unfortunately it doesn't quite line up. At least in the expansions, I think a lot of the times it starts doing so. So we're over to the Separatist camp. Separatist camps, to me, are very much like Centaur camps while you're in the human areas. They all tend to be the same sort of stuff. Just break their things and kill them, and there you go. So I don't expect much going on here. There's also a really nice big part of the map here, which is a jumping puzzle, the Lawclaw Expanse, which you can sneak into by climbing up some of the rocks here. Obviously, the jumping puzzles aren't really a part of map completion most of the time, but sometimes you'll find a vista or something locked in them. The previous map had the Demon Grub pits, which I never even mentioned in the commentary. This one's really nice, though. The jumping puzzle on this map's always been one of my favorites. Felt like they put a ton of work into it. Jumping blindly through the waterfall, avoiding all the flame traps, traversing the like half-broken stairways, the rock falls. And there's this, you know, intimidating pit of water low down. It's so weird. I mean, I have that jumping puzzle series on my channel, which I produced way back at launch. The Lawclaw Expanse is actually not a very big jumping puzzle, but playing it at launch made it feel so epic and long. It's unbelievable. I could complete it almost with my eyes shut now, but back then, not so much. It's funny how, of all the different things that Guild Wars 2 can train people to get good at, I think jumping is one of the few that people really end up nailing. So, now we're over here with the Iron Barracuda. A real highlight of the map, I think, the Iron Barracuda, a proper submarine that not only is cool to interact with and defend and see, you know, break and whatnot, but also ends up being a big part of the game going forwards as we deal with the Risen threat and all the stuff going on at Ore and whatnot. It looks like we've actually failed to defend the Barracuda here. I guess it doesn't really matter as long as we're just getting our heart progress. Killing Separatists obviously will give you some, and helping out with their machinery and whatnot gives you a lot as well. So much progress so quickly here. And there you have it. The Iron Dock Shipyard. That's the whole map complete. So a little bit about the Plains of Ashford. Another fun starter map. I'll see you guys for the next one next time. Thanks for watching.
There goes our submarine.